Hello, I'm Melanie Shantzfeld, Managing Editor of Orthodontic Practice US, a MedMark publication. Welcome to an educational presentation and question and answer with Ryan Moynihan. In our webinar today, we will be discussing orthodontic market trends and how to put those to use for your practice. Before we get started, I'd like to invite viewers to use the chat feature in the control panel on the bottom of your screen to ask any questions, and your questions will be answered at the end of the session as time permits. Now I'm pleased to introduce our guest for today. Ryan Moynihan joined Gaidge as the CEO in 2017, bringing a diversified background in finance, analytics, strategy, sales, marketing, business development, product management, and operations. He has over 23 years experience across many Fortune 100 companies in the areas of healthcare, consulting, and technology, and has a passion for growth and team building. Ryan spent time working at Disney, Intel, Ernst & Young, and Miller Brewing Company before earning his MBA from Georgetown. Prior to joining Gaidge, he devoted the past 16 years of his career to the dental orthodontic industry, working at 3M and Ormco in marketing and sales leadership positions. Ryan, we turn the webinar over to you to learn more about our topic for today.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, the introduction. Today we want to walk you through just kind of what did we see in 2022. It was obviously a very interesting year. And how can your practice leverage data in 2023? So we're going to kind of take a look back at what we saw and how that sets us up for 23, and then give you some tools, some models, some processes, some systems for what you could look at, how to leverage your data in 23. So with that, I'm gonna get started here. And our first topic is just around, kind of, first of all, we're gonna level set everybody on what is Gaidge, where is this data coming from, and how do we get it? So we want to make sure that everyone's kind of level set on that, just so we can kind of have a basis for where we go for the rest of the presentation. Then we're going to dive into the 2022 orthodontic practice KPIs for the USA. Then we're going to take a step back and we're going to look at what are the economists saying about the overall market and then the orthodontic market specifically. OSOs are a big trend in orthodontics right now, and so how did they do in 2022? So that's going to just kind of paint the picture for the overall market in 2022, and then we're going to start looking at, what are some models and what are some ways that we can leverage data in 2023. So that's our roadmap for the day, and we'll get started here. So first off, we're going to start off with what is Gaidge? So when I think about Gaidge, Gaidge is an analytics platform, and it's an essential business management tool that really gives the practice these intelligence dashboards, benchmarking, performance comparisons for these orthodontic practices. It provides clarity, saves time, and simplifies the tracking of your critical metrics so that you and your team can remain focused on what matters most. Basically, Gaidge is a pipeline into your practice management system. It takes all of that data that you put in every single time you're going through your day, working with patients, working with your front desk, and it bubbles that information up and it visualizes that information. In order for you to quickly see where are you winning, where are you losing, where are the opportunities in your practice. It has been developed by a consultant, Mary Beth Kirkpatrick, who has over 35 years of in-practice experience. And really what we're trying to do is distill down all of the data that is out there in the marketplace and bring that to the forefront for all of you to be able to quickly see where you are in your practice and spend more of your time on the clinical side. So we've got 80 different practice metrics that bubble up, 35 different practice reports, and then 9 custom dashboards. And in addition to just seeing the data that you have across these different areas, you can also create goals and do projections, which is really good. I mean, any business should have goals that you set and you go against. Also, you can view benchmarks and comparisons. We have over 2,000 different orthodontic locations that are reporting into the Gaidge software. So it gives you a really good opportunity to see where do you stand versus your fellow orthodontists in the marketplace. And then also it allows you to set action plans and budgets. So think about it as a compass or navigation tool for your business to really help you, cut to the chase and figure out how to win, even more in orthodontics. So that's just a little bit of what Gaidge is. And as we get into this, we're going to look at data from those 2,000 different locations, which represent about 850 practices and over 1,200 orthodontists that are reporting into this. So when we look at the market, it's obviously rapidly changing. If we think about all these different pressures of practice growth, it's harder to obtain new patients. Orthodontists coming out are having higher debt. There's more orthodontic competitors. More pediatric competitors, more general dentist competitors. There's a lot more folks doing orthodontics than it was, 4 or 5 years ago. doctor-directed do-it-yourself orthodontics, corporate dentistry, and with the census that's just come out, I think back recently, like even if we look at 2007, 2009, those kids that are starting to get to orthodontic age, there's fewer kids. So our market potential might not be as large as it used to be. So it's going to be really important for us to really understand the data and really be able to get after how we can pull these patients into our practice and grow our practices. So if you look at the evolution of an orthodontic practice, if we look at then, which is call it 8 to 10 years ago, typically a 1 to 2 owner practice, 1.5 locations, 7 to 9 staff members. Treatment took about 26 to 30 months, 22 office visits. Staff was actually around. They were loyal, 8 to 20 years staff retention. 16 to 18 days a month you worked, and your revenue was about 1.2 to 2.5, and your overhead was about 48 to 52. So if we compare that to now, still 1 to 2 owner practices, more locations though. It's growing. Our staff is bigger as well. Treatment efficiencies have definitely come down, so we're becoming more and more efficient, less and less appointments, office visits, time and treatment, those types of things. The big thing here is staff. Staff is turning over much faster. 3 to 5 years staff retention. Working 12 to 14 days a month, a little bit more on the revenue side, 2.5 to 4 million, and overhead is 54 to 62%. So definitely, the industry is evolving from where it was to where it is now. If we look at, kind of some of the tools that are out there, you might be managing your business on a spreadsheet. And it's hard to compile that information, put that together, and not always necessarily timely. You got to have a resource to do that. If you kind of look at that, we can leverage business insights now, through the Gaidge tool, and really quickly on a daily basis be able to see where you're at with your practice. And if we look beyond the data, if you start to really think about what you want to do with your practice, how you want to grow your practice, data allows you to pinpoint where your strengths and weaknesses. What are the trends that are happening in your practice, and what can you do to develop best practices, which ultimately lead to success? And without action, you're not going to lead to success. So that it's really important that once you do get the information, you understand where you're at. Creating that action plan is paramount for your success. So let's now dive into what we saw in 2022 with the orthodontic practice KPIs for the USA. So this is a quick infographic that we'll walk through a series of slides here that go through what I would consider some of the more critical KPIs that come out of your practice. So the first one we're going to talk about is production and collections. And so when we think about this, there's a ratio of production to collection, and last year it was 2.32%. We want that ratio of net production to net collection to be about 5 to 20%. So that shows that there's growth. So that means there's more folks coming into your office than what you're collecting on the back end. A little bit low last year, and as we get into some of the data here, we're going to see exactly why. Average contract amount was about 53.81, so we're starting to see that value uptick greater than what it should be at 51.50. Last year was a year of inflation. We're going to talk about that. Orthodontists were able to take some price hikes in the fees. The paid in full, a little bit higher than what we want, and that comes down to a cash flow issue. So we looked at that to be around 18%. So we want to make sure that we're getting the right cash flow, the right collection, so we don't spend all of our money that we get. So a little bit high last year. And then we look at production per doctor hour and production per staff hour, a little bit higher on the doctor hour. So that's good news. And then staff hour was a little bit less from what we saw last year. We look at exams and starts, as we break this down, on average across all of these practices, 1,126 new patients were added to our practice management software. It's a big hunting ground there to pull patients into your practice. The split between child adult was about 67 to 33% there. Average number of future exams, so that's healthy at 70, showing that we're starting to get more and more of these folks on the books out in time. That's an early indicator of where our success is going to be in the future months. And then this ratio here, the new patient to exam percentage, 82%. So when you think about the business funnel within the orthodontic practice, and we're going to really dive into this a little bit later in the presentation, but those 1,126 new patients that were added, how many of those actually came in for an exam? And we're seeing only 82% of those came in for an exam. So that gives us an opportunity that we would like to get that number close to 90%. And so at 90%, that's that 10% fall off is kind of where we want to be. So there's an 8% gap there to get to 90% that definitely is going to become a leaky bucket, and we'll talk about what that looks like. And then if we look at where treatment starts came from, We're starting to see same day starts are on the uptick, about 19%, and then aligners were about 28% of total, and our full bracket treatment was about 50% of where we're at. So, continuing to see aligners take more of what we call share of chair within a practice. Not so much in 2022, but from where we were 5 years ago, absolutely, it's ticked up a bit. We look at observation. So this is a critical piece. It's going to be another key focus of what we're going to look at when we leverage the data in 2023. But your observation pool within your practice, it's got to be managed appropriately. We want to see at least 25% of your starts come from observation. Last year, we saw about 23%. If you think about it, you've already created a relationship with these patients. You've brought them into your practice, you've examined them, and so you have them in your pool. What kind of processes and systems are you doing in order to make sure that they get in, to make sure that they are start when they become appropriate orthodontic age? So only 8% we're seeing each month. We would recommend that we want to get that to 14, so you're not seeing enough of them in the practice. And then 29% we're not seeing in 12 months. So there's almost a third have not been seen. And then when we look at between phases, so those that have already completed phase 1 and moving into phase 2, only 12% of those have been seen each month. We want to see that at 17%. And then 18% we're not seeing in 12 plus months. So, we want to make sure those patients are right for future treatment within your practice, and we need to make sure that we're tapping into that resource and pulling those folks into a start. So these are just different areas that we need to be looking at. And then we'll finish up here on this infographic with treatment efficiency. And treatment efficiency is defined as, what are you charging for a case? We get to value per visit here, divided by how many visits it takes to complete treatment. And so full treatment is your brackets and wires, that's $294. And you can see aligners on the far side is $431. So fewer visits usually lead to a higher value per visit. A lot of times it's more efficiency within the practice. And we're going to really start to look at later on how we can leverage this data for profitability within your practice. So the target's about $300 is where you want to be, 310, 300, something like that. And so a little bit, low on the full, but obviously above on the aligner treatment. So that's where we're at. Okay. So this is we call a stoplight chart. So we've got yellow, green, and red. And on the left-hand side, we are showing what 2022 did. In the middle, what did single doctor practices do? And on the right, what did multiple doctor practices do last year? And down the left-hand side, this is what I would consider to be probably the most critical, outside of treatment efficiency, that's not here, but the most critical KPIs that you should track in your practice. And that's net production, net collection. What are you charging? How much is your initial payment? And then that lower section there is all about the patient funnel. So how many people called me? How many came in for an exam? How many started? And what type of start percentages do I have? And then what's my conversion rate? So when we look at it, 2022 was a tough year. And so as I look at this chart, when we look at overall, we're seeing a lot of red and, handful of areas that just were down year over year. We had a really good 2021. We'll get into what that looks like. But 2022 definitely did give back. Some bright spots there were average contract fees. So with the record inflation that we saw last year, we were able to see price across all modalities here, or practice modalities. We were able to see improvement too in the exam to new patient call ratio. So that trended to be about 80%. Usually we see that at 78%. So we're starting to see a little bit of uptick there, which is big. It's a big deal because that's more patients, more at bats for you to get patients into starts. It was a tough year for aligners. This is the first time we've seen aligners go negative, down double digits. And then, just overall starts were down, pretty handsomely there, about 5 points, across the board. So, some good categories, some tough categories, some categories that were just kind of, in the middle there. But just to give you a flavor, depending on the type of practice you have, it gives you a chance to benchmark, how did you do? How did your practice do versus, what did the aggregate do if you're a single doctor or multiple doctor or overall US? And all of these benchmarks are available if you are a Gaidge subscriber, and you can benchmark yourself daily against each one of these. So secondly, now what we want to look at is sequentially, how did this play out in the orthodontic market across the quarters? Because I think that's really important for us to look at when it comes to, are we seeing trends that are going to continue into 2023, or are we seeing things that trends that potentially are improving as we move to 2023? So, the first one here, net production, you saw that, kind of started off slower, picked up a little bit, came back down a little bit, but net down 4.9%. That production to collection ratio we talked about, only 2.2% there. We did see good news with price. Our new patient calls actually improved as the year went on. So you see in Q1, we were down 6.5 to 8 to 4.3 to only 2.8. So that's a good trend. That's why it's green as we move into 2023. Our exam to call ratio, also a good trend, going from 78 to 84. Really good signs there as we move through the year. Adult exams, this was an area that was a hot topic, high growth area when we had COVID. What we saw is, it started off soft in Q1 and got really tough Q2, Q3, Q4, almost double digits. So, an area that I think is an opportunity area within the practice. And then we get into aligners. We talked about that on the previous slide, but started off the year, kind of flat and then really accelerated to be double digits down across most of the different type of modalities there, whether it's total aligners, adult aligners, and then, child wasn't as bad. And then share of chair has been something that traditionally has grown every single year and almost exponentially. And this year we saw it be pretty flat, kind of staying around that 20, hovering around that 28% mark. So definitely a tough year when it comes to aligners in the practices. And then conversion rate was down as well as we move through the year. So something, obviously there's opportunities there for us to improve that. All right, so now let's look at what the economists are saying about the overall orthodontic market. At Gaidge here, we follow ITR economics. And so this is a little QR code here. If you're interested in anything having to do with the economy, I think these folks do a really nice job of dumbing down the information and putting it into bite-sized chunks so that we can all understand it. I know myself, I'm not an economist, but this is also nice to you'll be able to learn from them. And we've been following them for probably the past 5, 6, 7 years. And they've been pretty spot on with some of the forecasts that they've had out there. So a lot of this that you're going to see is going to come from them, ITR, and if you're interested in this, I'd recommend you take a look at them. So, last year was really kind of characterized by accelerated disruption, and so put that into 3 buckets. COVID pandemic, on the tail end of that, but it still had an impact on our lives, supply chain, just the way people act sometimes just had an impact. Then you look at workforce revolution. We had more available jobs than we did participating workers, and those that did want to work, they wanted to be paid more. So wages are up. So obviously that has an impact on an orthodontic practice. And then overall, just economic volatility. We saw record inflation. We saw a volatile stock market. We saw gas hit $5 at the pump. Now, if you're in California, that's not a big deal. If you're in Atlanta, Georgia, like we are, that's a big deal. But nationally, $5 is a big deal. We also saw energy. Energy is up 34%. Food is up 12%. So just a lot of different things that impact our lives that we saw just kind of record inflation on last year, and just really helped disrupt the overall marketplace. And so that did have an impact on what we're doing from an orthodontic perspective. So this is what the current U.S. economy looks like as of January 2023. And so these are all leading indicators. And so when they are green, you can see below with phase B, that's accelerating growth. That's a good thing. When they are yellow, their growth is slowing. So that's something to watch out for. And then when they get into red, that is considered recession. And, obviously that's a tougher time. That's not necessarily what we want to see. So when we looked at this in the fall, the projection was all of these leading indicators were in the green or the yellow, so they were projecting a soft landing. But as we flipped into 2023, housing and financial, which are 2 of the largest leading indicators, they flipped to red. And so, we're probably, ITR was projecting a recession kind of in that 2024 timeframe. They've pulled it in a little bit. So I think 2023, might be just a tough year as we look at this, especially with housing and financial, kind of hitting the recessionary piece. So just something to watch out for, but I think you're all probably aware of this with the news that you ingest that, it's tougher times out there right now. So, but just want to give you a picture of kind of where we're at. So when we look at the orthodontic market, there's a great model that ITR has out there called rates of change. And the rates of change model is basically comparing a 12-month rolling average to a 3-month rolling average for an indicator. And so we're going to look at net production today. And so as this graph unfolds itself, we're gonna take a look at a 5-year trend on and what we want here is we want a 3-month rolling average to be above the blue line, to be above the purple line. Okay, and what that means is that we're starting to see growth. That's an indicator that we are in a recovery session or we're in a growth session. Those types of indicators, the early indicators of this. And this is a really cool model to look at, kind of where we're at from an economic standpoint, and when should we start thinking we're going to get out of, maybe if we are in a recession or if we're in a slowing growth period. So what I really like about this is that if you look at pre-COVID, the market is extremely flat. It doesn't oscillate all that much. It goes between 0 and 5% for the most part. Then we hit COVID, and you can see the blue line just absolutely took off after the shutdown was over. So those 3 months, obviously, of March, April, May in 2020, and we have normalized this data. We pulled in the 2019 data to take out the shutdown data because that helps normalize this graph. But we did see just tremendous growth we haven't seen in the orthodontic industry for a long, long time, if ever, at 20, 25%, 15%. And then, we got towards the back half of 21, the market started to come down a bit. And as we got into 22, it basically, the blue line stayed below the 12-month rolling for most of the year. So a good 12 months, at least, from the end of 21 through 22. Then we started to see a little bit of an uptick there towards the end of the year. So that's good news. Is starting to hopefully return to a level of normalcy. Still not above zero, but one peak there. But still showing progress above where the 12-month rolling is. So if we look at last year, this is the data. Good news is if we overlay our production from the last 5 years, and if we look at this on a 4-year compounded annual growth rate, it's 3.6%. So the message is this is a pretty stable industry. We had the big sugar high of back half of 20 to 21 and gave back a little bit back half of 21 to 22. But overall, if we look at this over a 4-year period, the market is where it's always been, 3.5%, between 0 and 5. So that's a good sign. And then as we look at year to date, now we have data here through February. And if we look at the key indicators, net production, exams, and starts are all doing pretty healthy to start off the year. So that's all a good sign, even though we are kind of dealing with maybe some of these headwinds of the recession. So just want to encourage everybody that, there is some growth going on out there aggregately in the orthodontic space. And then if we look at aligners, same chart, and we look back in history around 17, 18, 45% growth, and until we got to this year, we really hadn't seen a decline in growth, but, last year, obviously double-digit decline, especially with adults. And then as we look at this year, the 4-year compounded annual growth rate's about 8.6%. And then this year, we started off okay in January. February was a tougher month. So kind of, not as bad as last year, but still kind of on that negative side of where we are from an aligner standpoint. So just food for thought on that. All right, so as we complete 2022, let's just look at how the OSOs did. And so on this chart, we're pulling through the critical KPIs on the left-hand side. We're showing you what the OSOs did in the middle column, and on the right-hand side is what did the USA do. So let's just kind of do a quick comparison here. Similar net production, but OSOs had pretty strong net collection. So, kind of showing growth there, which is positive for them. Not necessarily able to charge as much at the OSO level, and the initial payment is down. So that's an area where the USA aggregate does a little bit better than the OSOs. Patient exams, they had a pretty strong end front of the funnel. Patient funnel. So new patient calls and exams, were definitely much stronger than what the overall USA aggregate was. Adult exams showed positivity, and patient starts were not down as much. Aligners were not down as much either. So they kind of weathered the downturn a little bit better than the USA did. We did see growth in child aligners. Share of chair is really low, so they're not doing as much aligners in the OSOs as they are in the US. And lower case acceptance also is kind of plaguing maybe some of their opportunities to get starts at 61%. It's off about 6-7 points versus what the USA is. So, overall, kind of a little bit, some better performance, with the OSOs, but, overall some areas that, weren't as good. But just another way for every practice to benchmark themselves against, what's going on in the orthodontic market and carving up the data a little bit differently. All right, so let's look at now, let's flip the calendar to 2023, which is where we're at, and let's talk about what's driving profit per clinical day. So when we want to take all of the data that's in your practice management system, put it into Gaidge, and we want to distill it down into a very simple, bite-sized, digestible metric of if I'm being effective in my practice, what is profit per clinical day in my practice? And that's what we want to start talking about as we move into how to leverage this data in 2023. So there's 3 different steps to solve for profit per clinical day. And what we have done is we have a sample size within our Gaidge universe that has the operational Gaidge data that's pulled from the practice management system, but it also has overhead data that's pulled from the practice management system, or the QuickBooks systems, your accounting system, sorry. And so we combine the 2 of those data sets across 450 practices here, which is obviously statistically significant, to really understand through multilinear regression what drives profit per clinical day. So I will spare you all of the details of going through how we did this data poll, but just kind of get to the chase on this. But in order for us to do this, to set up the model, you have to identify what are the variables, and then how are those variables correlated with each other? What drives what when we look at variables? And then we run a model, a linear regression model, and we iterate it multiple times until we get a value as we remove variables that we like, that we can say, hey, this 85% of the time predicts profit per clinical day. And then, we stop and we look at those variables and say, okay, what are they? And then we can put math to them. So when we look at the variables that we put into the model, if you think about, what we're looking at across your practices, things like value per visit, visits per completed treatment, a lot of expense, whether it's staff expense, other practice expense, aligner expense, marketing expense, marketing dollars per exam, marketing dollars per starts per clinical day, calls per clinical day, aligner share of chair. So there's a handful of different metrics that we kind of, if you think about, put it all into this model, see what's correlated with each other, and then start removing variables and say, okay, these are the variables that drive profit per clinical day. So as we run through the model, the data tells us that these are the 3 metrics that drive profit per clinical day. The first one is starts per day, second one's value per visit, and the third one is expenses. And so you may be looking at this, listening to this right now, and you say, okay, well, no kidding. Yes, that's very basic. Sure, it is. But with statistical superiority here, these are the 3 that really you should focus on and double down and make sure that you have processes and systems around to make sure that these are driving exactly what they need to be doing to drive profit per clinical day. And we're going to walk through each one of these and put a number on, if I do 1 extra start per day, that is worth X. If my value per visit goes up by $1, that is worth Y. And if I can save a percentage to net collections on expenses, it's worth Z. So we're going to walk through all of that just to kind of really give you hopefully some bite-sized chunks of what this looks like from a practice standpoint. So the first thing we're going to talk about is starts per clinical day. And what is the impact of 1 additional start per week? So if you think about it, 0.25 a day if you're working 4 days a week. And this is all scalable. So if you work 6 days a week, you can scale it up, right? If you have, and this is all going to be about single doctor practice. So if you have multiple doctor practice, you can scale it up. So just kind of quickly double it, do the math as we go through this. So when we think about just the overall marketplace out there, the total USA total addressable market for orthodontics, US Census says, hey, there's 331 people walking around, of which, if we are all being critical and looking at people's smiles and occlusion, there's a belief that potentially 100 million people out there need some type of orthodontic treatment. And at any one time, there's only 3 to 4 million people that are actually in treatment. So whether you believe the 100 million or not, maybe it's 50, maybe it's 25, doesn't matter. We only have 3 to 4 million, that's data, that's fact, that are actually in orthodontic treatment. So if we could even move that lever by 1 million, we would see growth that we've never seen in the orthodontic market before. So that's the goal, is like, how can we go tap into, this group out there that, call it, where are the other 96 or whatever number you believe in orange there? Are they unaware, don't care, can't afford? And what can we do to go pull them into our practice in and around our area? So, this is the orthodontic patient journey. And so this is, kind of more of the older school one with the chevrons here of, hey, you start with awareness, consideration, purchase, retention, advocacy. That's kind of obvious and basic. Where this has morphed in the last, call it 5 to 10 years with digitization, is there's a lot more that goes on besides those basic chevrons there. So things with social media, Google, parent networks, videos, patient referrals, technology, your online reviews, treatment efficiency, those types of things have all factored into, is a patient going to engage with your practice? Are you going to get them in and examine them and start treatment? And then are you going to treat them with clinical excellence and efficiency? So that's, the basic orthodontic patient journey. So if we look at just, how marketing is evolving in 2010, it wasn't as digitized as it is today. So it's more focused around local sponsorships, tied in your communities, hard to track ROI. Then you got into 2015, more digital. However, we didn't necessarily have the metrics to track the ROI on that. So it's more of the spray and pray digital. So, that's probably where Facebook came to prominence, Google, and targeting right people was more difficult. It was just more of this big, as the picture says, spray and pray. And hopefully we can do that. Now, as we get into where we're at now, we've got a lot of data-driven technologies and targeting that can really help drive that ROI and make sure that those dollars you're spending for marketing are actually driving the patients into your practice. So depending upon how you're approaching marketing within your practice, what I would recommend is that is there a way for each of you to take more of a data-driven ROI-based approach to marketing, versus maybe what you've done in the past. So just food for thought there. One of the tools that Gaidge has is around market maps, and so we partner with a company that instead of in the past, if that was your practice, you'd draw like that circle and you'd mark it to that area in and around. We now have the ability to be very targeted based on the mosaic or persona technology that is out there. And so for those of you that are not familiar with that, is that the credit agencies have put us all into a bucket of we are bucketed into one of 72 different persona types. And we are bucketed based on, where we live, what our age is, what our income is, how we live our life, all of those types of things. So pretty fascinating, some of the data that exists. We've been able to profile over 250,000 patients. So we really understand who's saying yes, who's saying no to orthodontics. So imagine having at your fingertips a targeted persona segment that would most likely come in to get treated for orthodontics, and then being able to go out into that marketplace and understand exactly where they live, who they are, and have their IP address. So that's the level of sophistication I'm talking about. That's the level that you could potentially really maximize your ROI investment and get very, very focused on your target market to come into your practice. So that stuff exists out there, and it's really exciting to kind of see that play out. And so with marketing, this is a little matrix on how much you're spending versus how many exams that you're getting. And so it's just over a population here. And so if we draw this grid on here, those folks at the bottom probably need to look at investing more, because you might climb up that curve on the left-hand side of new patient exams. Up here, those folks are probably pretty efficient with what they're spending and what they're getting back. Over here, you got to analyze, are you spending too much to get what you're getting, or is that the right amount to spend? And then down here, you're probably being pretty ineffective because you're spending a lot and you're not getting a lot. So just another way to look at, how your data is playing out within the marketplace from a marketing standpoint in your practice. So what I really like here is this new patient journey. And so this, I think, is the key piece of, do you know this number for your practice? And this is a very basic model, but it drives a lot of helping to predict profit per clinical day. So on the left-hand side are new patient calls. So 835 patients have called the practice, these are single doctor practices, and said, hey, I want to start treatment. I'm giving you my name and address and all my information. Of that, only 676 came in for an exam. Only 264 started right away from an exam. And then you got to work the back end of your funnel, where now I'm going to go look at who's ready from pre-treatment observation for a start. And then of those 676 that did not start right away, 79 came out of pending. That gives me total starts of 437. So I had 835 calls, 437 starts. You can see that's a pretty big fall off And there's opportunity there that's probably been missed within, and this is aggregate single doctor practices across the US. So we can say, with confidence across the board, there are opportunities to drive more patient starts into a practice. So if we look at leaky buckets, the new patient call to exam, we talked about this earlier, should be about 90%. So that would be 752 exams versus 676. Our observation program should be 25% of starts. We talked about that earlier. That would give us 109 patients starting versus 94. That's $75,000 of more opportunity. And then if we were to get to 70% case conversion, that would give us 473 total starts versus 437. So, my challenge to all of you watching this is that, do you know this number for your practice, and is there an opportunity there? And if there is, then this is where we're going to take a look at what we're going to give you one suggestion here of potentially how you can tackle this opportunity here. So observation within Gaidge, these patients are categorized by age. So we look at 1 to 10, 11 to 14, 15 plus. And so what's startling when we look at the aggregate data is that there are 433 average number of observation patients in a practice across the Gaidge data. 57% of them are 11 years or older. So that would mean to me that there's a healthy part of your observation program that is orthodontic ready at 11 years. We're only seeing 7%. We should see 10% in the marketplace, every month. So that's a little bit low and light. Are we actively managing this observation group appropriately? And then 30% of them haven't even been seen in 12 months. So a third of that 433, if you think about it, they're just not even being cultivated with a relationship in your practice. So this alone is a massive opportunity in orthodontic practices. And if you are a Gaidge user, or if you're not, I would really understand your observation categorization there. And I mean, very, very quickly, it should give you massive amounts of opportunity to go tap into new patients there. One thing we are introducing with Gaidge is our Gaidge Consult Manager. So that's going to actually make this automated and very easy for all of you to track your patients through this patient funnel. We're going to have a patient queue, payment slider, reporting. So it's going to walk that whole patient from before the exam, through observation and pending patients, and really give you an easy way to track how those patients are moving through your practice. So you don't allow some of these patients to be not seen or unheard of for the last 12 months plus. So that's coming on the marketplace. If you're interested in that, let us know. All right, so our profit per day impact. If we start to put math to this, if we have one additional start per week, that's going to give us about $377 of additional profit per day. If we annualize that, it's $63,000. So if you think about where that comes out of the statistical model, if you could add another $377 of profit per day that you work 168 days a year, if you're a single doctor practice, that is pretty substantial to your practice. So that's what that math does. And hopefully there's a couple tools there that show you how you can actually get that additional start per week. All right, let's move into value per visit. And so with value per visit, we're going to look at what is a $1 increase in value per visit due to drive profit per day. Now, as we mentioned, value per visit is defined as what are you charging for treatment divided by how many appointments it takes to complete that treatment. So we look at productivity plus efficiency is equal to profit. Efficiency is basically, what resources are you using to produce the work? If you can get more outputs from the same inputs without adding more resources, you're efficient. If you can see more patients without adding more time or staff, then you've increased efficiency. And if you can treat more patients efficiently, then you are more productive, which leads to increased profitability. So those things all build on each other. So we have looked at over 150,000 completed cases, and we kind of cut off the tails, so to speak, so we could talk about what's kind of the average type of case in the middle here. So we're looking at between $5,000 and $8,000 case fee, 9 to 30 months in treatment. Brackets are 11 to 30 visits, and aligners are 5 to 25 visits. And our target value per visit is around 310. So on the left-hand side are the brackets, on the right-hand side are aligners, and we're comparing value per visit with the blue bars, and months in treatment is the gray line on the right-hand chart is how you measure that. And then we've put all the visits into buckets. So for brackets, we go 11 to 14, 15 to 19, so on and so forth there. And on aligners, we go 5 to 9 up to 19 to 25. And so what we see is obviously, the more visits, the more time in treatment, the less value per visit. And that's obviously going to have an impact on profitability. So one of the key indicators, and this is another what I call one of the key charts within Gaidge that you should, if you're not using Gaidge, you need to understand this, but if you are using Gaidge, it's right there for you on a daily basis, is how many patients are beyond estimated completion date. And if I look at the aggregate information, 57% of patients are 180 day plus over ECD within the total pool here. That's a really big number. 211 is huge. No-shows are up, appointments are up 2.5, so that's definitely contributing to this. If we start looking at margin impact, so what we've done is we've taken an average margin for brackets and an average margin for wires. What we can see here too is that even the middle 20% of aligners is greater than the top 20% of brackets when it comes to margin. So and I'm not an advocate here for aligners versus brackets. I'm an advocate here for treatment efficiency. So we do track aligners versus brackets, but there's a lot of digital bracket technologies that are out there on the market now that have really helped reduce treatment time. So if you start thinking about that for your practice, really to drive profitability is about less visits, more efficiency, and that plays itself out in the database. So if we're going to maximize value per visit, going back to what I just said, what's that treatment modality that suits your ability to see patients less frequently? What's your early indicator process that they're not tracking to ECD? And then, once you've got to be able to treatment optimize and address those overestimated completion date challenges out there. And so, enhancing your schedule, if you have doctor goals, you potentially be able to work less days, increase production, overhead would be more ideal. And then practice goals, exam availability, better conversion, space in the schedule for same day starts, and just an overall improved culture. And then, just examining the factors that impact your efficiency. What's stopping you from meeting your goals? Is it your team, days work, using technology, bracket choice, aligner mix? Those are all things you need to consider as you look at this. And then, what could happen with your schedule capacity, clinical days, hours per day, number of chairs, appointment time, visits per hour, appointments per day, appointments per month. All those types of things can be thought of. The more efficient you can be with treatment, the better off that can be. Hopefully less stress, better culture, those types of things, more profitability for your practice. So when we put math to this, for every dollar increase, it's going to be about $4.65, annualized at $7.81. Now, that may not sound like a big deal at all, but I will say that you're not going to just get a dollar increase by doing some of these different processes and systems. You're going to get 10, 30, 50, $100 increases. I mean, we saw the spectrum there on the value per visit chart that it does range wildly. So being more efficient will absolutely move this number faster, and that bottom line number will be much larger than just $781. So food for thought there as you look at this from a value per visit standpoint. Last thing we're going to talk about is expenses. And so what we're looking at here is, what does 1% increase against net collections do for profit per day? And so as we looked at the expense Paretos, we put them into 6 different buckets here. These are called box and whisker charts. The boxes in the middle represent 50% of the data. The little T's at the top and bottom represent 95% of the data. And then you see some outliers there above and below each of those. So the big thing here is, as I look at this in aggregate, is that there's a big variability across practices, profitability there. That will have a major impact on your profitability, especially if your staff expenses, up to 35%, where it should be around 22%, 21%. So the question I have for you is, do you know your practice's spending percentages across the main big buckets? And I think everybody should know that. And I think this should also be reviewed on a monthly basis, not a quarterly or biannually or annually basis. I think you got to really start to understand this more frequently than I think the average orthodontist does at this point. So if we look at just the practice waterfall for expenses, this is kind of how it plays out. Staff is 22, liners are 6, clinical and lab is 7, marketing is 5, equipment and facilities 10. Other is 7, and then if you do have an associate, that's going to add to your expenses. Overall profitability, about 43% of every dollar there that you're collecting. So just overall averages there. And so just things to think about. I mentioned it before: manage it monthly, leverage automation tools, understand the benchmarks, and I think really looking at expense as a percent of net collection, that's critical. You can't save your way to prosperity, so there's got to be a healthy balance. Spend more, make more, and then pick a couple categories. Focus on the highest dollar percentage amounts first, and start working there. If this is overwhelming to you as you start diving into this. So And if we look at this, what does this impact? It's about $170 to $415, and that can cascade up to $28,000 to $70,000. And the reason there's a range here is because we have 6 spending categories. Each one's a little different, so we have to do the back end of the range with the top end of the range, and kind of it can play somewhere in between that. So as we put it all together and wrap up here, these were the 3 categories, 3 critical metrics that, as we look at going into 2023, starts per day, value per visit, and managing expenses, where you can really impact, I think, your practice profitability. And so, just to kind of review the takeaway notes from starts per day, are you upgrading your marketing approach? Do you have a digital targeted persona-based ROI model to ring your phone? Do you know that exam to call ratio? That's critical. And then are you maximizing your observation program, paying attention to the aging 11 plus? And then secondly, with value per visit, you should know this metric for your practice. Fewer appointments is more dollars, more profit, and then managing that over ECD. We looked at that, create that early indicator system before it's too late. And finally, managing expenses. We just went through that. Should be reviewed monthly, focus on your highest buckets, leverage automation tools, visuals, and then healthy balance of spend more, make more. So with that, I will turn it back over for questions, and we'll go from there. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ryan. There are some questions coming in, but before I get to those, I'd like to again invite viewers to use the chat feature in the control panel on the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you have. First question, what are the top 3 data points a practice should focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to break it down into about 10, but in a couple of the slides, I brought it down to about 3. So I think if we look at net production, we look at new patient calls to exam, that new patient call to exam ratio, and then overall treatment starts. I mean, those are kind of the big ones that are going to drive the profitability and understand, are you winning, are you losing, kind of in your practice, and how those things cascade through.
Second question, we have data in our practice management system. How can we leverage that data?
Yeah, and so everything that we pull in Gaidge is absolutely straight out of your practice management system. So most of the practice management systems have some reporting structure. What we have done, with our business here is take that information and visualize it and summarize it so that you can very, very quickly see where the trends are, see where the opportunities are, see where the wins are within your practice. Like I said, all that information is available in the practice management system. It just might take you more time, effort, and a resource in order to put that together, collate it, and then if you want to look at this daily, you're going to have someone have to run a report every single day where Gaidge would automatically present that information to you. So yeah, it's basically pulling everything out of a practice management system, but it's just putting it in a format to where you can easily digest it, hopefully.
What is the number 1 mistake you see practices make when looking at their data and benchmarks?
Well, I would say they're not doing it enough, or they're getting overwhelmed by focusing on too many metrics. So I would say that you have to create a discipline, and with any business that's run, there's usually a monthly review. I know there's a lot of Gaidge super users that like to look at their data daily. With some of the metrics, I would look at the data daily or weekly, and then some of them I would look at monthly. So I think the mistake, though, is 1, I'm not looking at the data because you could be a victim of some of those leaky buckets that we talked about. But then 2, maybe you are trying to dive into the data and you're trying to ingest it all, and that can become overwhelming. So what I would recommend is you start off in bite-sized chunks. So maybe you look at just the patient waterfall from new patient call to exam to start, and you go from that. And then once you master that, you figure out ways to improve that in your practice, then maybe you pull in your observation program, you pull in your over ECD, you pull in your value per visit. Those types of things is where I would start as far as just kind of educating for those that aren't necessarily used to looking at tons of data to just start to get started.
Okay, where have you seen the most change in the orthodontic industry over the last 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge push, obviously, to more digitization, treatment efficiency, fewer visits. I mean, that's what the market is demanding. We're seeing that, and the early stage was, hey, we got to go to aligners because aligners are more fewer visits, maybe less intrusive. Some obviously aligners became self-directed too with some of the DIY stuff. But now, there's a lot of digitization of braces as well that's giving us fewer appointments, fewer visits. So that whole efficiency piece, I believe, is where, one of the biggest change where the market's going in the last 5 years or so.
And speaking of recent events, how did COVID affect the orthodontic market trends?
Well, we saw it play out in that rates of change analysis. So, we saw a very stable 0 to 3% market, and then COVID hit, and we saw this exponential growth that we've never seen before. And a lot of it was due to we call the adult Zoom effect. So there's a lot of folks at home staring at themselves on a camera all day, where they, a lot of times you don't look at yourself unless you're in the morning in the mirror, maybe at night and throughout the day, a couple times. But we really saw like an explosion of adult, even exams went up to from a traditional 6% to 24%. That's obviously come back as of last year because we saw the adult exams were negative. But I think COVID really had a positive impact on the marketplace, but it was erratic. And then last year, call it even on the tail end of COVID, we gave back a little bit. So I call that the sugar high from middle of 20 to middle of 21, and then middle of 21 to call it middle of 22. It's kind of a give back time. So, but all in all, if we look at that compounded average growth rate over time, the market's pretty stable. So that's kind of where what the impact was with COVID.
Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for your questions, but we've run out of time today. If we did not get to your question, we will answer it after the webinar via email. Thank you all for attending, and a special thank you to Ryan Moynihan and our sponsor for this webinar, Gaidge. Thank you, and stay safe out there.
Awesome. Thank you all.